I'll talk about, are we ready?
Yep.
The bike. Just when I thought maybe I was not going to ride it much anymore, I was riding KTM's, Gas, Husqvarna, trying all the four-strokes out. And at that time, the one I liked the best was a Gas, believe it or not. It just was such a nice bike, and I got rid of it. Then I got a new, in 24, I got a new KTM 250, and I kind of liked it, but it wasn't as good as the Gas was. So then a friend of mine, the place Central Florida Power Sports, they sell Husky, KTM, Gas, and they also sold these, and they were just getting them in. It's just when these things were hitting the United States. And somebody suggested to me they thought it'd be a perfect bike for me at this point in my life. And I took a chance. I mean, it was kind of an unknown. And I took it and got it. And I remember I rode it here for the first time and said, whoa, I fell in love with riding again, you know. It was that good. It was that good. So it got me going again, and also got me to the next level at this stage of my life. I was able to do stuff again that I didn't think I could. And it was all bike. They're really that good. And they're constantly improving them. It's like a work in progress. They're not sitting on their hands, on their laurels, actually. It's a work in progress, and there's always software upgrades that they send, firmware. They just send over. It goes in the bike by itself. And an interesting thing, this bike is called a Varg, and that's the 60 horsepower model. And they make an Alpha, which is the 80 horsepower model. The bikes are exactly the same except for the horsepower. I could make this bike an Alpha and make it 80 horsepower by just buying the software, and they'll load it up. But I said to myself, if I can't use the 60 horsepower, why do I want 80 horsepower? So I didn't do it. And it's fine. It's as fast as I ever want to go on it. It's kind of amazing. I haven't raced it yet, which I hope to do in about 3 weeks. I'm going to start racing again. And it'll be in the Sunshine Vintage Motocross Club. And they have, of course, it's obviously vintage, but they have open classes and age groups. So there's something for me to ride. And I'll ride this and see where it goes. It's a 7-race series, and I'll give it a shot.
How'd riding go today?
It actually went really, really good. It was a little dusty because we haven't had any rain in a while. I guess I made up for it now. But it's okay. I like coming here. The surface for me is, I'm used to it from up northeast. And I like coming here and riding. It's safe. The jumps are safe. It's fun. No pressure. So I come here probably 2 or 3 times a week. And then I'll ride over at Spider too. But I don't ride the main track. I ride in the field next to the main track. And I made a turn track over there, and I just practice turns. That's fun.
Do you have any memories of Saddleback Park?
Yes, I rode there.
What is that?
That was a California track. I'll tell you an interesting thing. I was riding for Mako at the time, and we were at a big lull. I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I actually got approached by Kawasaki to come to work for them in California as a test rider, and that's when they were getting pretty serious with their motocross bikes. And I wanted to go back to New York, so I didn't take the job at the time. But I lived out there in Huntington Beach for a while. And what was nice about that is you could race Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday. Make enough money to just live and go to the beach all day, because these were mostly night races. Saddleback was one, El Toro was one, Ascot was one. And I made some good friends out there who I'm still friends with to this day.
I'm going to ask you a bunch of names. You tell me if you remember them or not. They say they remember you. Maybe they were a little younger, a little older, but they know you. Mike Holland.
Oh yeah, I remember him.
What do you remember?
He rode Suzuki's.
What else do you remember?
He was a good rider, and that's about it. If I remember something that was unusual, I never heard of this. He broke his arm water skiing, and I always thought that was unusual. I never heard anybody breaking bones water skiing. That's what I remember about him. I remember one time we were at a practice track, and he let me try his 250 Suzuki. I said, man, this is a nice bike. You know, it always used to bug me if I got on somebody's bike and it was I went better on their bike than my bike, and I would go, what am I doing? You know.
You know Hunter Cycles.
Oh yeah, very well.
Tell me about it.
Kind of grew up with them. I remember when they started. They had a place up in Bedford, New York, and they were a Yamaha dealer right away, and that's how I got involved with Mako. They took on Mako, and I started riding Mako. But I did getting ahead of myself. Once I got off Bultaco and Bultaco wasn't making bikes anymore, I went and started riding Yamahas, and actually had some good success. I liked them. The shop was good, mellow, kind of nice. And the bikes, Yamaha was really going into technology. They just kept changing the bikes every year. And they got better and better and better. Some of them were like the first YZs 250s were very hard to ride. They were so pipey. And what that is when you hit the gas, it would hit the power band and just explode. You know, hard to control. But it was a nice fast bike. Later on, as the years went by, they wanted to grow, and my father had a place for lease down in Thornwood, New York, and Hunter moved down there, and that's when they started being Team Hunter. But I wasn't riding with them anymore. I moved on to another brand, and I'm trying to think of what that could have been. Oh, I know what happened. I was getting out of motocross and starting to do hair scrambles and enduros, and I started riding Suzukis for a place in Briarcliff called Hudson Valley Motorcycles, and started riding out of there. And then I got an opportunity. I was doing good. I got an opportunity to ride for Team Green, which was Kawasaki, and I was going for the qualifiers for Loretta Lynn's, and I remember going to 7 qualifiers, riding at 250, and won like 14 motos in a row. Qualified for Loretta's, and then something happened and I couldn't go. I was really disappointed. And then, at that time was when I was kind of transitioning to bicycle racing and mountain biking, and the motorcycles were kind of over here. And I started doing cross-country ski racing, had tremendous success in doing that. And the reason I took up cross-country skiing is a lot of the Europeans, motocross guys, were doing that in the winter for training and fitness. So I said, well, if it's good enough for those guys, it's good enough for me. And I got in it, started learning how to do it, started racing the races, and started doing good.
Okay, let's see. I have, let me get back to it. DeFeo, does that sound familiar?
Oh yeah, that was Sonny DeFeo, which is really good friends with Barry here. And that was Ghost Motorcycles, which was in Long Island. He was very fast. He won nationals, actually.
Where was it at on Long Island?
I have to ask Barry. I think Huntington.
Okay.
And that was notorious. Like, they had these cool jerseys and it said Ghost, and I always said, geez, one day I'd like to ride for them just for the jersey. I never did, but it was pretty cool.
Billy Silverthorne.
Never heard of him.
Okay. Bobby Schaefer?
Yes.
Marty Tripes, obviously, right?
Marty Tripes I knew really pretty well from California. He did the same races I did, and I was in a good out in California. I was in a good circle of riders: Tim Hart, Bruce Barron, Grossies, Gary Chaplin. These are who's who was out in California, and I hung out with them quite a bit. Went to the beach. Nobody worked really. We just rode nights and made money and hung out at the beach all day, surfing and stuff like that.
Stu Anderson and Stanley Calhoun.
All right, Stu Anderson was a guy that I knew really well, and him and I battled for the #1 plate in New York on 125s. I edged him out at the end of the year and got the #1 plate. And then we still stayed friends. I've lost contact with him the last few years. I know he's still around, but I don't talk to him. Stanley Calhoun was a guy. He was a wild man. He was around for a while, and then he disappeared. He rode Suzuki's, and I was never really friends with him or close to him.
There's a guy named Frank that has some kind of dealership.
Frank Strenard. Barry could probably tell you some good stuff about him. But he came over from Czechoslovakia as a mechanic, and he was actually Barry Higgins' mechanic. But he rode pretty good. He wasn't bad. And he ended up defecting to the United States.
You want to hop in there?
Hop in.
Yeah, can he squeeze in there next to you for a minute?
Heck yeah.
One day, the only hat I had was this stupid thing.
Got a milk crate or something you can sit on?
Yeah, there's one.
Yeah.
All right, who we got joining us? Special guest.
Barry Higgins, the legend. Factory rider, numerous brands. Trans Am rider, I believe, if I'm correct. You can straighten me out. He was the first American to beat the Europeans. Is that right?
I was a sort of.
Europeans,
In motocross on U.S. When the Europeans came over here at the beginning, they were unbeatable. No one could beat them. The best we could do, the best we could hope for, would be a top 10 against the Europeans.
Yeah, when the first year they came, well, the first year that we saw a European was '66 when Edison Dye, who was the Husqvarna importer, brought Torsten Hallman over to here to promote the bikes, and Hallman was a 4-time world champion, and he came and he went to California. He went to California first, and we ended up. I happened to be talking to a guy, and I happened to be winning pretty much everything around New England at the time, and I was talking to another dealer up there, and I said, wait till Torsten comes here, because we'll show him how fast we are and blah, blah, blah. And ended up, we were in for a big surprise.
Big surprise. Unbelievable. Yeah. They did things that you never thought were even possible.
I mean, I was lucky enough. The very first moto, I led the whole moto up until the last 1 or 2 laps, and then we only had 15-minute motos, which we had never ridden before. We were scrambles races we did were pretty much
10 laps.
5-lap heat and a 10-lap final, and that was it. 15 minutes was out of the question. And we learned a lot. And it was funny that a few years later I saw Torsten Hallman at a Supercross race, and we were talking, and we were at a Supercross, and I said to him, I said, did you ever think we'd be, 20-some years that it was after that we'd be inside a building riding motorcycles and everything? And it was right when the Americans had started their run on the Motocross Destinations racing, and which they ended up winning like 12 times in a row, finally. And he said, man, I never thought people from here would get that fast, that quick, and that we'd end up, with a bunch of, world champions later on from that. So, we were fast learners, or some people were, but it's gotten to be a more mainstream sport now than it was back then. So.
One of the things that I can remember like it was yesterday was going to this track in Massachusetts called Pepperell. It was one of my favorite tracks. And I remember the Europeans were coming, and we drove up from New York to watch them. And, you're hanging on the snow fence, and you're waiting for them to come out. And all of a sudden, they come out on the track, and they go around. And I said, oh, that's pretty good. Then they started going, and you just went, what is this? And it was just amazing. Each guy was faster than the next guy. And it was Roger DeCosta and Joel Robert and John Banks and Smith.
There was quite a few.
Torsten Holman.
There was
a lot of
about
them.
in '69, I think, was probably the most Europeans they had, and they had pretty much every world champion that was before up until that particular time were at those races, and then guys that we might have heard of, if we were looking at a magazine or something like that, but they pretty much dominated all of the races, and luckily by that time we had gotten a couple of guys. Gary Bailey got to be pretty good, and John DeSoto was getting pretty good, and Russ Darnell and a few guys that were getting to be fairly decent. And the Interam series it started in the East like normally at Pepperell, and then every week for 2 months we'd go to a different track. There was in '69 there was 12 races altogether at it, and we'd start out at Pepperell and we'd end up at a couple races in California. And a little bit about myself, I was lucky enough to get to travel with those guys and race with them every single weekend, and the first, before we had national championships, they used that Trans Am series as sort of a makeshift championship for the United States, and I was fortunate enough that I was the top American in 9 of the 11 races, and I was finished as high as 3rd behind in front of all of the guys. But so I was lucky enough, and I learned a lot from them. I mean, I learned a lot of riding and a lot of things that we didn't know. And then later on, I was fortunate enough to get to go to Europe and ride Grand Prix for a year or so.
One of the things that I didn't mention when we did our first interview was Barry here was my hero. Back in the day when motocross started, I can just...
Sorry, your standards are so low.
I can remember going to my first race actually ever and watching him race these New England guys, and it was something. They were on these ground pounding Triumphs, BSAs, Harleys, going around these scramble tracks, and I said, man, I got to do this. And the rest is history.
So somebody asked a question or brought up some memories. Do you remember racing Jeff Convoy?
Oh yeah, he was my big competition in the 125 class. Him and I would go, nice guy, New England guy. He would travel down to New York races, and we'd race for the championship, the District 2 34 championship. He rode a Montesa, I was on Bull Taco, and at that time I was actually sponsored from Bull Taco, Moto East, the importer. And we'd go at it every race. We'd go ahead hammer and tong, but I beat him for the championship. I'm still friends with him.
So I'm guessing this is a bike, Rickman Zundap? Or is that a person? Or
Yeah, no,
that's a motorcycle.
Rickman is the frame. Zundap was the engine.
Tell me about that.
There wasn't very many. They weren't that great.
No, they were called what they call the Rickman. Actually, was called a Rickman Matisse, which was a Matisse it's a kit bike, and Matisse is another name for mutt. Then they made frames, and then they'd stick Triumph BSA, AJS, Norton motors. I mean, they had a little bit of everything.
The Triumph Matisses were pretty serious. They were pretty nice bikes.
And they promoted, when the lightweight stuff started taking over at scrambles and motocross races, they licensed a company to build frames, and they'd put different motors in them. They had Boltaco motors in them.
Yeah.
They had Zundap motors in them. They had a Montesa one for a while with all two-stroke stuff, because basically everything in England was built around a four-stroke motor.
You can correct me on this, but I think the Zundap, didn't the early KTMs evolve from the Zundap engines?
No, the Zundap,
Okay.
the Sachs motors
Sachs.
were what KTM
Yeah.
started out as. That was back in the, before everybody had really big places to build bikes and all, and that's how the Matisse came about. because basically what we were racing, when we were riding the Triumphs and BSAs and stuff at the Scrambles track, it basically was a street bike with no lights on it. And, you know, we'd strip them down to get them as light as
no
we
mufflers.
could. Yeah, and put some, you know, put some different tires on them. And I mean, we back then we didn't change the shocks, the forks, anything.
No.
Stock wheels, stock this, and just took off all the, pretty much the stuff that would make them street legal and made a race bike out of them. So.
Stanley Calhoun on a Suzuki 400.
He rode a thing called the TM 400, which was a death bike. No one, if you rode that and you made it through the race, you were lucky.
Yeah. That was a,
He was a wild man, a wild man.
They were the power band, was what's more commonly known as a light switch. You have no power and then you have all of it before you could
Dangerous
even get
bike.
a chance to.
He was the only
start.
guy I know that could ride one.
Jeff Smith.
Oh yeah, he was a European from England, and probably the best race of my whole life was against him in Pepperell, and we were in 125 class. He was riding. Can-Am hired him to develop their motocross bikes, and he was on a prototype 125, and I was on my Bultaco. In the first moto, I beat him. The second moto, I hole shotted him, led the whole moto. Last turn, no, the white flag lap. He put his wheel up inside me, but he didn't get me. Then the checkered flag lap, the same turn, he came inside. And after the race, I remember him saying, "You didn't get the message on the white flag lap, huh? You should have tightened it up." Anyway, that was probably my best exciting race of my whole career.
Yeah, you forgot to mention he was also 2 times world champion.
Yeah, he was 2-time world champion.
And he was British Scrambles champion multiple times.
I remember coming over the finish line and all the people were lined up and they were all freaking out and clapping and everything, you know. And I ended up, because of that race, I ended up getting my, I got a trip to Spain, which turned into staying over there for almost a year at the Bultaco factory. And it was kind of, they were looking for an American to ride the European GPs. And I think I was the one that got the first tryout, and it's a long story, but I didn't make it. I just wasn't fast enough to be a GP rider. So they got this guy called Jim Pomeroy, and he was a California guy, I think, or a Washington guy.
Washington. Yeah.
He went over to Bultaco, and we were before he came over, we were developing a GP bike, and I would ride it almost every day on the practice tracks they had at Bultaco. He came over, and he was the first American ever to win a GP, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And he rode it basically on a bike that I had a part in developing.
Helmet Speedy Clayson. He's 90 years old.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Helmut Clausen.
Clausen.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I
He's a German guy that moved to Canada at some point in time, and he rode, before he came to Canada, from what I understand from him, he rode he was more an off-road rider. He rode multiple 6-day trials, which is now called 6-day enduro. And he was a German enduro champion and all, and a really good rider. And he up until he finished up riding, he was riding one of those regulars on that they ended up making a few of for the, they actually, before they called the 125 a world championship, when it was a European championship, Zundaps won the first 3 places for overall for like 4 or 5 years, and then along came Suzuki and Gaston Rayer, and pretty much put him out of business and winning anymore.
One of the funny stories on Zundap, it was something I kind of made up, is they had 6 neutrals.
Yeah.
The gearbox, the shift, it was awful. All you ever get is neutral, punch it down, neutral, punch it down, right?
Yeah, between those and the early Sachs motors, they had what they call a selector key transmission, and if it got the least bit out of adjustment, that's what you had. You had 6 speeds, and 5 of them were neutrals. So, and it was, they fixed that in the end, but just like everything else that came out of Europe for a few years. Once the Japanese came to this country with real motocross bikes, it was pretty much the end of BSAs and Triumphs and, you know, Bultacos and all that stuff. I mean, they spent millions and millions and millions of dollars on bikes and riders to get world and national championships, as many as they could, which was a lot, and that pretty much started us off into the real motocross stuff, which now is, you know, really a mainstream sport with, you know, with a lot of people. But motorcycling racing in general is a very small amount of people that do it, and there's a really very small amount that are good at it.
What do you consider the golden era of motorcycle racing, motocross?
It's, you know, it's hard to say because it went in different things. The British started it back in the 38, I think, or 37, and started in a field which they called scrambles, which the same tracks later turned into the name motocross, which was what it ended up with Europe. But I mean, they started it in the, you know, somewhere between the, you know, the 50s and the 70s was probably the thing, because there was, at one race at Unadilla in New York, at the vintage race we did, you know, I always kept track of the amount of riders and bikes and all. We had 31 different brands of motorcycles that rode on that vintage day, and they were all from all over the world, from different countries. Now you have 5, and maybe 6 or 7 when you get, you know, Ducati's coming now with a motocross bike. You know, there's some other people developing motocross bikes. You have the bike like Steve's riding, the electric bike. I mean, they have some, but it's a very small amount of manufacturers who are now participating in national stuff. And back then, you know, guys would show up with Italian bikes, especially. Italy would, at one time there was allegedly 500 manufacturers of motorcycles in Italy, the different things that they made. So, you know, they probably, now there's, you know, things have gotten so sophisticated that, you know, a guy can't build 10 bikes in his garage and have, you know, and bring them out and have them successful if he, you know, only if he's really a good engineer and really lucky.
What I asked Steve this on the last interview. What is your best memory on a motorcycle?
Well, there's you know, it's kind of hard. There's a lot of them. You know, the best thing, you know, I think was when the Europeans came and I got to race with those guys, and especially, you know, when Hallman came that year, it was 15-minute motos, and we were almost a lap ahead of everybody else in there, you know. So that kind of made me feel good. But I mean, you know, I rode 6 days. I rode the Baja 1000 and won my class the first time I tried. So, you know, and I went to 7 different 6 days. I've been to every country in Europe, and a lot of them, you know, like Czechoslovakia, East Germany, Hungary, you know, all those places, Russia, places nobody could get in. And with it being a sport that I did, I was lucky enough to get to go to those places. So, you know, it's hard to say. One of the biggest regrets that I have is when I was working for OSA, there was a guy by the name of Dick Mann who was a multi-time champion at everything. You know, the guy was like the best all-around guy I've ever seen, and he was working at Yankee with me at that time when we were developing the OSA and all. And one day Dick comes up to me and he says, you know, you need to go to Europe and ride, you know. And he said, I'll quit my job. He said, and go over there with you and be your mechanic and do that. And he said, I know some people over there and all. I'm going, you know, I'm kind of like, I'm doing really good here. I'm making some good money, you know. And now every time I think of that, I kick myself in the ass for not doing it. You know, I mean, that could have been that could have been the lifetime opportunity that I passed up. So
That's how I am with not taking the Kawasaki job. I regret that to this day.
you
That would have been awesome.
know, but you know, we're lucky. We're still here. We're still enjoying the sport and enjoying the people. And you know, Steve and I have talked about this different times. But what other sport can you name that there's two guys that both had pro licenses or had pro licenses, or a bunch of guys that had pro licenses that are in their 70s or 80s or whatever, that get together and have a big thing and they have fun. They still know one another and still do the sport they were good at or professional at. You know, it doesn't happen. This is such a tight-knit community that people, you know, I mean, Steve and I have been friends since the 60s, you know, and I have some other friends that
And he still talks to me.
Yeah, sometimes. And you know, I mean, it's just the thing. You know, we don't. You know, get off that subject. People don't talk to one another, and they don't have friends for a long time. You know, because they text one another or something. You know, so you know, and I don't know how many hundreds of people that I know that I knew from pretty much from day one of racing that are either still in racing or in the motorcycle or out of racing, but you know, there's still a few of us that are not smart enough to stop doing this.
What keeps you going, and do you have a plan on stopping?
Well, I figured I'll stop when they put the top on the box. You know, I mean, as long as I can. My dad rode until he was 86 years old, and he raced at vintage races with me till he was 81.
What was his name?
So, Harry Higgins.
Barry Higgins?
Yeah, and he rode, you know, he rode motorcycles during World War II. He rode a motorcycle back and forth to work in New Jersey, and he quit that. And then, right at the end of my grammar school thing, he bought me a motorcycle, and we started racing. And started riding within about 6 or 8 months. I was racing, and he started racing, and you know, I mean, and he would go, and people would come up to me, you know, and say, "Man, I remember your dad back, you know, when we were racing scrambles races and all." So, you know, I mean, it's been a long history, and it's been a lot of fun. You know, there's bad times like there is with everything, but you know, I mean, it's, you know.
Do you have any funny stories you can remember between the two of you guys?
I have a good one. Traveling out to California for a Trans Am, and I was in a van, the Mako van, and I was with this guy, Tor Janssen from Sweden, and we're towing a trailer, and we're driving out to Carlsbad, California, and he's going through someplace in Midwest. He's doing 100 miles an hour, towing a trailer. I'm sleeping in the passenger seat, and all of a sudden, the state trooper pulls us over. He comes over, rolled the window down. He says, "License and registration." Tor, he could barely speak English, and he started talking to the cop in Swedish, and the cop looks at me and he goes, "Can you speak English?" I go, and Tor had an international license, driver's license. The state trooper gives him the license back and just goes like this. And we went driving off.
You know, I got one of those that's similar to that. The guy that he mentioned earlier, Frank Stenard, was my mechanic when I was actually riding for Ghost and doing the Interam series in '69. He spoke very little English when he got here. So him and I ended up doing the whole series from one coast to the other, driving along in a van. Frank learned English by reading street signs as we're driving around, or reading something we'd stop to eat or something. But we're in Denver, Colorado, and we're staying at a hotel, and we go down and we're having dinner in the bar, basically. And we're sitting there, we're talking, and we had this all worked out, kind of the same deal like he was talking about. If we got pulled over, I didn't speak any English, and Frank would, give them. We drove with those FIM licenses for years, and giving them out and speaking some strange language. Anyway, we're sitting there at the bar, and these two ladies of the evening, we'll call them, come over and sit down by us and, oh, would you guys buy us a drink, blah, 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 you know, and Frank and I had been doing this with getting pulled over or trying to beat somebody out of paying for some lunch or something that we didn't eat. But anyway, Frank goes, I no English, I speak, you know, I'm doing it much better than he did. I speak very little English, and him, nothing. You know, and by that time I had known a little Czech and some German and stuff from what I got from him. So we bought him a couple drinks and we're hanging out there with him and all. And Frank goes, bathroom, I must go to the bathroom. So he goes to the bathroom and the two ladies look at one another and they go, we need to get these guys up to the room and get them drunk and get all their money and this and that and blah, blah, blah. So Frank comes back and he said, we must go. And I stood up and I can't repeat what I told them, but I told them in little different words. I said, the next time you try to roll two guys in the bar, you better make sure the other guy doesn't speak English, and walked out. I mean, you know, and there's stuff like that
endless,
endless stories of.
Back in the Trans Am days, we'd ride in these van caravans. Everybody follow everybody through, you know, the country, and nobody had a lot of money there. I mean, you just basically, you got a credit card from the factory and you use it for gas and dinner and that was it really. Anyway, nobody could get hotel rooms, so one team of guys would get a hotel room, open up the back window, and 10 guys would jump through the window to take showers and stuff and then go.
What's the craziest place you've ever had to keep a bike overnight to keep it safe? You know, how you got to keep sneaking into a hotel room here and there. You have any
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's a lot of guys. I mean, a lot of guys' motorcycles got rebuilt and overnight in hotel rooms and things. You know,
sure.
One of the hardest places. Luckily, we didn't have to do the bikes, but 6 days for like 4 times was in Czechoslovakia, and you'd have to go in there, and I mean, you had to tie down everything in there. You know, the bikes were lucky because they were in an impound area, and you do that. But I mean, the things that, you know, people that have never been to one of those countries really don't have a good idea of what's going on in there. And I mean, one time when the 6 days was over, the local people, riders or just people, would come and we'd trade things for other things, you know, from Czechoslovakia, and you know, they all wanted the uniforms or jerseys or whatever we had, or you end up like, I traded a pair of Levi's for a crystal vase that I still have that 20 years ago was estimated to be worth $500, you know, and they wanted, you know, because they couldn't get that stuff. And we went, this isn't really on that subject, but we went downtown to Bratislava one time and we're walking through there and there's a whole bunch of people looking in a window of a building, and they had put a TV set in there. And there's like 20 people looking at the TV because they had probably never seen one before. So, you know, and, you know, there's, you know, we've had bikes stolen, we've had stuff, you know, I mean, that happens with everything. Motorcycles, unfortunately, you know, if you go to a race with a bike in the back of a pickup truck, you better be handcuffed to it.
How do you guys feel about these full shot devices, traction control, starting blocks, metal starting grate? How do you guys feel about all that?
I'm old school. I wish they never had any of that stuff.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, personally, for my take on that is that, and the stuff, I mean, obviously the bikes have gotten way better than they were, you know, the suspension, the frames, the motors, this, that, the next thing. But the bad part about that is you can't fix one of those bikes at the track when you come. And all the gadgets and all that things have obviously made it thing, but in turn, that also made the tracks that they now ride, you know, like especially Supercross and the motocrosses are still pretty good, but they made the track so dangerous because the bikes are so good that, you know, the stuff that we wouldn't even have thought about doing, you know, is what is normal now. So, you know, and again, the bikes have gotten way more money than the people are making that ride them. You know,
Do you think that the sport's becoming a little gentrified and outclassing the working man?
Oh, yeah.
yeah, it is and it isn't, you know, because unfortunately, every kid that has a dirt bike, and their parent, not every kid, but a lot of the parents think he's going to be the next Ricky Carmichael or this or that, and they go head over heels and, you know, mortgage their house, do this, do that, and then they end up in the toilet because they put money into everything, and little Billy never got to go anywhere. So
When I got hurt last year, I broke my shoulder. I went to PT, physical therapy, and I had a Spider shirt on when I walked in. And the lady who got assigned to me saw my shirt and she goes, "Oh, you do motocross?" I go, "Yeah." She goes, "My son does motocross. His name is, you know, Carter. And here's a kid, 10 years old, 4 bikes. 4 bikes. And the whole thing, they all they want to do is make Loretta Lynn's. So they go to all these qualifiers. Well, the kid was that good. I mean, he was good. Really good. But this goes to show you, here's a 10-year-old kid with practice bikes and race bikes.
So obviously the rain's getting a little harder. I think we're done riding for the day, right?
Oh, yeah, that's not happening.
Until next time, I'm sure we'll come out maybe next week, do it again or something.
Sure.
You guys have anything you want to say?
well, it's, you know, one of the things when you just got, Steve was talking about the kids and all that, one thing that I worked for KTM on what we called trackside support for like almost about 15 years. And, you know, keep it fun with the kids, you know, don't be, you know, and unfortunately, and again, this is my take of it, that, you know, they've homeschooled the kids, and the biggest part of school to me was, of course, learning to do something, but it was socializing with other people.
People skills.
And they don't do that now. So
No.
the kid grows up, he's never been anywhere but to the races and all. He's done, dad's screaming at him, mom's mad because they mortgaged the house and little Billy isn't winning. We all started doing this because it was fun, you know, and we're lucky enough that now we're still having fun at it. But the guys nowadays make so much money at it that when the money stops, you don't see them come out to the amateur races and ride. A few of them do, but not very many.
Well, and a lot of them, they're not very well-rounded individuals. They feel like they only have one skill set, just hopping on a bike and getting good lap times.
Right, it's a thing, you know, it's just, again, it's because we like doing this and we like having fun, and you get together with a bunch of your friends and lie to one another about how good you did last week. And you know, and it's just the thing that we're all still having fun at it.
I mean, I'm 80 years old and I'm out here doing this.
And we're stupid enough to be sitting here in the rain.
I thank my lucky stars. I'm so fortunate. I'm blessed to be able to do this.
So, one last thing before we finish. You said lucky stars and then you said blessed. So do you believe in luck or God or combination? Are you a man of faith? Do you mind talking about it?
Yes, yes, yes.
All of the above.
All the above.
Before I'll do this, I got some people that I ended up that are sort of relatives to me, and they're all Democrats, let's say. And you know, they're all, oh, do this, and I asked them one time, I said, have you ever been to a communist country? No. Do you know anybody that's, you know, like a bunch of people we all knew that escaped from there to get out of those places? No. So, and I told them, I said, well, you have no idea what you're asking for, you know, for this stuff, and just, you know, I mean, I don't go to church or I don't do anything, you know, like that, but I know that somewhere there's somebody keeping track of us,
There's a
and
greater,
you don't want
there's
to
a
piss
higher
him
power.
off.
There's a higher power. I'm sure. I'm
So-
convinced of it.
So,
Or else, how will I still
yeah.
be here?
Yeah.
So what do you think the meaning of life is?
Trying to find out the meaning of life.
Yeah. You
That's
s-
the meaning of life.
Yeah, you spend your whole life trying to figure out why you're here, basically, you know, and luckily enough, we both were good enough at stuff that we kind of got to know what we were good at, and you know, and I made a living at it for
I'm
like
a
20 months,
I'm a
20
firm
years.
believer in karma. And
Yeah,
I believe what goes around comes around.
Yeah.
And I treat people, I try to treat them like I would, I know it's a cliche, but I treat people the same way I want to be treated.
yeah.
And that, I want to keep it real. That's all.
Sometimes treating other people as nice is really hard, especially nowadays when you're talking to people that, again, that have really no idea what they're talking about, you know, or what they're trying to do, or what their cause is, or whatever, you know, and I mean, I understand that, but you know, they get so far off the track, so far out of things about what's right, what's wrong, what to do, what not.
It's
you
a
know,
different world we live in now,
Yeah.
and it's not necessarily a better world, but it's different. And going back, I still was better in the old days. I mean, the politics now and the way people treat each other, you can't even make this stuff up anymore.
So I have two final questions. What would your message be to your fellow Americans right now? And what would your message be to the world that's watching what's going on in America?
First of all, what I want to say is, why can't we just get along? Why is there so much hate and just general people being jerks? Treat
Yeah.
your neighbor. Just be kind.
You know, there's so many people that are standing around collecting money, or collecting this, or doing this, or sneaking into the country, that have no business being here. You know, if they want to come here, that's fine. Come here legally. And the other thing is, they give away the money that him and I and you all work for. They're giving it to people that have never worked a day in their life in this country. They get treated better than our veterans or anybody like that does. So why is that something that should be right? You know, I mean, that's just, to me, that's just ridiculous.
Something that I really believe a lot in is there should be term limits.
Yeah.
Because these career politicians, 25, 30 years, that's craziness. What are you nuts? And then the other thing is, how can you come into Congress being broke and then end up with $9 million in your bank account?
Yeah.
What is that?
We better stop talking. We're
Yeah.
going to be the next ones on the list. Be looking over our shoulder
Yeah,
on the
really.
way home.
FBI.
What do you want those people around the world to know? Because they only see the politicians and the media. What do you want people around the world to know about us real Americans? You know, what kind of people we are?
Well, what kind of people we are now is hard to say, you know, because there's so many splintered off in different directions people, you know. I mean, back to the politics things, when we were kids, we had Republicans and Democrats, and they all sort of got along, you know. The Democrats had one way of doing it, the Republicans had another way. But I mean, all in all, you know, even with all the craziness that's going on now, name me one country that's better off than we are. And I challenge anybody in the world to do that, where there's more people that are happy, that have their own houses, they have their own stuff, they get to do what they want. You know, there's no place in the world that you can live as nicely as you do. You got to pay your dues to be able to do that, but you know, it's still a better place than
These
anywhere.
politicians get in front of a camera and just lie their brains out.
Yeah.
And you know they're lying, but they just do it because they have to do it. And you can't respect that. You
They
just
don't represent us. Average.
common people. No, they don't. They don't.
All right, cool. You want to give us an outro? Hey, I'm Steve. I'm Barry. And, you know, thanks for watching. Until next time, something simple.
I'm Steve Agronick. Thank you for watching.
And I'm Barry Higgins, and Hope everybody out there has a good day and treat your neighbor right.
Peace. Cool. Thank you guys.
That was good.
Yeah, that was good, man.